just to get it clear what the objectives are today. The objective today is to have a look at the short form of contract, and you'll see through the presentations how common the short form is. It's by way, in volume terms, the most common contract that's used in public sector contracting. Now, since about 2006, we've delivered training courses on the new public sector contract to about 8,000 and odd people. So somewhere in here there's the 8,342nd person that's been trained on these contracts. But nonetheless, members and companies and people, both sides of the fence, get into trouble on these. It's by far and away the one that we've most difficult disputes to deal with. So that's why we're having this course, and we're running it in a series of courses between here, Cork and Galway. The speakers who will introduce now, Susan Bryson is a partner with Mason Hayes Curran Solicitors, and she's a lot of experience in dealing with the short form and on other construction contract difficulties as well. Susan will be giving her presentation after the first break. Donald O'Sullivan, who's our Director of Tendering and Contracting, he'll be our first speaker, and he'll deal with the whole context of where the short form sits, how the tendering process works, the whole procurement area. And at the moment, it's a view that the industry is unconsciously incompetent in relation to these contracts. And that goes for both sides of the fence, employers and contractors. And we would hope through the morning of this session to get to the stage where at least we become consciously incompetent, because it's only then that you have some chance of getting through these contracts in a very difficult market, in a highly competitive market. Every penny counts. So if we don't know the rules of the game, if we don't understand how to access your entitlements through the contract, you're adding an additional risk burden that really most companies cannot afford to take right now. And I'd much rather have a session like this where we can shout at each other, rather than looking at you as a mediator or a conciliator or indeed in litigation. The time to assess these contracts is at tender stage. The worst type of telephone call that we get in the office, and it does happen, Martin, John here, I just won one of these public sector contracts. What are they like? And that happens even now. So it's about education. It's about, and this is education. It's not training. You're experts in the industry. You know the stuff yourself. Myself and my colleagues have a huge advantage over most people in the industry. While some of us might sound as if we know what we're talking about, in fact, we have benefited from all of the experiences that have been accumulated since 2007 on these contracts. We've seen it. We haven't seen everything, but we've seen some terrible errors being made and misinterpretation of what you think your rights are, when in fact they don't exist. And that's the purpose of going through these things today. So, the geniuses among you may be consciously competent, but we want to get to the stage where we're unconsciously competent. And we know these people who are unconsciously competent. We meet them. They're the people who just know how to do it. It's an instinctive reaction to a set of circumstances on any contract. And that's where we've got to get to at some stage.
The short form is one of a suite of contracts. Now, there are 11 contracts published by the GCC, and they replace what used to be the GDLA and the IEI3, they're for both building and civil engineering. Back then, we had those two contracts. We didn't have design and build forms. We didn't have short forms either. There was a short form that the OPW used, and to some extent, that OPW form sort of found its way and morphed into the GCC short form. But you can see there where it sits. It's just one of a suite of 11 contracts that are published and available from the GCC. Now, just to give an idea, because we were getting phone calls here and we were surprised that we were getting probably more phone calls about the short form than any other form, and we began to try and puzzle, just how many contracts are done on the short form. And putting the figures together, we expect that there will be about 2,500 public works contracts awarded in 2012, about 2,500. Of those, 1,000 of them will be of a value of less than 250,000, and therefore the short form should be used. Another 400 of them will be between 250 and 500,000 in value, and again the short form gets to be used there as well too. After that, you move into the minor works form between 500,000 and 5 million. And no, there are maybe 900 contracts within that range. Now, not all of those will be done by the minor works form. A number of them will use the standard form. But ideally, it's only those contracts above the 5 million, of which there are 200 of them, that should use the standard GCC form. No, I expect that many of you here will be users of the short form, and indeed the other forms as well too. And I know, like, kind of, that there's some of you here that will probably be less experienced. So I'm going to take a little time just to show you what I consider to be two essential websites to anybody who's involved in contracting in the public sector. First website to have a look at is the Construction Procurement Reform. That's the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform website. It used to be the Department of Finance. It's a very, very comprehensive site. Anything you want to know about the public sector contracts are on that. Now, when you open the website, that's the page you will get. And if you scroll down through it, you will find there pillars on the left-hand side. It's divided into 4 pillars. And on the first pillar there, you can find any of the contracts. If you click on those, it will give you any one of the 11 contracts. It will also give you the schedules, the forms of tender, the invitations to tender. All of those you will find on that website. If you move on to the second pillar, it will give you the terms of engagement of professionals in the industry. In other words, the architects and the surveyors. And it will give you all of the systems, if you like, kind of, and the forms and the procedures by which professionals are engaged. Now, that can be useful information to have at times. The third pillar, I suppose the main thing about that is that it deals with a suitability assessment and pre-qualification. And you can download all of the relevant forms from that, the pre-qual forms or the qualification forms. And as well as that, you can download the instructions that the public authorities get as to how these should be used. And then finally, on the pillar 4, there's a whole set of guidance notes. There's that length of them. They deal with everything kind of from use of the GCC forms in general to the approach that contracting authorities should be taken. They deal with all aspects, and indeed any contractor who hasn't got that website on his list of favourites is really kind of not up to it. All of the information that you could want is here, and my strong advice to you is be familiar with it and use it. Now, the other website that I want to show you is the eTenders website. And no doubt, if you're involved in bidding any works, you're familiar with eTenders. But it really is a huge step forward from what used to be there. And if you'll think back a few years, you have to be watching the paper to see what job. You maybe heard of a job that was advertised. You had perhaps to watch the local papers. You had to have engaged some outfit who would alert you to tenders. You don't need any of that anymore. Every job is advertised on eTenders.